Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Derek VanRiper here with Tim Heaney. Tuesday, August 29th, 2017, as we near the end of August and get ready for the final push for fantasy championships and, of course, for playoff spots. If you listen to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, please take a moment to leave us a nice rating and review. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks to the many of you who've already done that. Lots of ways to connect with us. He's at Tim Heaney on Twitter, but Tim_Heaney. I'm at Derek VanRiper, no underscores. At RotoWire gets you all the RotoWire tweets, at RotoWire MLB for all things as far as the baseball news goes. And then you can find us on Facebook. Just search RotoWire on there. Hit the like button on our page. You can connect with us that way. If you got questions for us for future episodes, fantasybaseballpodcast@gmail.com is the best way to send those in. Tim, how's it going for you on this Tuesday?
It's going all right. You know, it's not exactly the best weather for that for baseball season. It's looking more like that F word sport is approaching. We'd like to have Labor Day weekend a little bit sunnier, but I can spend the time indoors kind of worrying about what's missing from my fantasy baseball teams that are in competition here down the stretch a little bit. How about you? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm just looking at this last month, hoping to get the 5-point difference made up in the NFBC main event to cash in my league. I've never cashed in a main event league, only in the online championship, so that'd be a pretty big third place finish even in that format, so hoping that works out. Trying to stop hemorrhaging points in Tout Wars. I think I'm down to 13th place. I was in 7th a few weeks ago. 15-plus points or so lost in the last 3 or 4 weeks. And that's in part because Clayton Kershaw has been on the shelf, but that really can't be the only reason for that, of course. There's other things going wrong. I built a pretty bad team, so that's part of the problem as well. But good news for Kershaw owners, especially those pushing for titles instead of just pushing to keep their fab for next year. Clayton Kershaw, scheduled to return on Friday. I keep looking at it and thinking, okay, let's see what they do with him these first few weeks. It's probably going to look like normal Kershaw from a volume standpoint, but you have to wonder if they kind of give him the kid gloves treatment down the stretch as they try to make sure everybody's completely healthy going into October. Like you push it, make sure the back holds up for 7 and 8 inning starts now, and then for those last handful of starts, perhaps during the head-to-head fantasy championships, you're looking at a guy that maybe goes 5 or 6 and gets an earlier hook than usual just because they want to try to preserve him for October.
Yeah, absolutely. You're welcome. You're happy to have him back in the lineup either way, and maybe you'll knock a quality start off the expectations for the rest of the year, like you said, if they do keep him to 5 or under 6, whatever they feel comfortable with. But and there's also the risk that the Dodgers will go with a 6-man rotation because they'll have Alex Wood back soon as well in the coming days, and they'll want to preserve all these guys for the postseason just to kind of have everybody in good shape going into, because they do have nothing to play for at the moment really. So but you're still excited. It's going to be basically a national holiday when he does get back.
Absolutely. Some other key players coming back and dealing with injuries on both sides, really. But Trey Turner, one in the coming back group, 2 for 21 on his rehab assignment. I mean, realistically, if you have him, you just activate him at the next possible opportunity. Really encouraging, though. He's expected to come back on Tuesday. Dusty Baker, I think, made that announcement after Monday's game. Turner's the kind of player that I think people are already looking at as a clear first-rounder for next season. I mean, we've seen stolen bases dry up a bit. We know Turner can be a difference maker in that category, but also an asset even in the power categories too, because unlike Billy Hamilton or D. Gordon, Trey Turner appears to have like a 15 home run sort of upside to go with all of those steals.
Yeah, I kind of looked at him as like a better Starling Marte with the power coming into this year, and the fact that he was eligible at middle infield, second base and shortstop was very alluring. Well, he was going to get shortstop in a lot of leagues, I think it was, right, this year. He was qualifying to get that early in the year. But 3-position eligibility is going to be nice there if he does keep that. But people will be concerned probably about what he can offer with the power, with the line drive stroke that he's really known for. But you do just want to have him back for the pace that he'll probably attempt to steal anyway at this point. Maybe he won't. Maybe there'll be some worry that he won't head first slide as much because of the wrist issues. But I don't know. You're probably still looking at close to double-digit stolen bases for the duration that he is back, and that's going to make a big difference in a lot of leagues where you have had Turner help propel you towards the top of the standings. That's going to be a nice late-season boost for you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, he could single-handedly turn a category if steals are, very compact right now in a Roto League. I think the problem we're going to have with the Nationals and Dodgers, something we've mentioned for weeks now, is that as you look at the final couple of weeks of the season, their key players may get extra rest because they have that luxury. They may clinch the division with a few weeks to spare. So depending on how your league works, if you have a lot of Dodgers and Nats and it's head-to-head and it goes all the way to the last week of the regular season, that's going to be a bit dicey if you've been really controlling your league to this point. Let's move on to some other injury news. Miguel Cabrera leaving with lower back tightness. Bad timing in that they're on the road right now in Colorado, so if he misses more time, it's the best possible opportunity for Miggy to recoup some of the value he's failed to deliver to this point. Still in the appeals process, I believe, for that suspension he was issued for his role in the brawl with the Yankees last week. This has just been a bizarrely forgettable season from one of the best hitters of our lifetime. And the more I think about Miggy's price for next year, I was kind of looking at like a 3-4 turn kind of player. So in a 15-team league, a guy that goes off the board before pick 50, can't help but wonder if he actually falls a little bit further than that, because there are so many quality options at first base right now, offense being up league-wide, and the number of injuries that have really started to pile up for Miggy in recent years has probably made him a significant health risk. It's kind of following an Albert Pujols sort of arc, where now you look at him and you think he's still a great player, there's still a lot there, but it's just not the same ceiling that we were accustomed to for so long.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to make the point with the Pujols, like the reality check, I guess. The fact that Cabrera will be 35 at the beginning of next season, you have to recalibrate what he's going to give you. If these injuries do end up somehow healing next year, I think he's actually had pretty good hard contact rates this year. I don't know about the StatCast ratings, but the power is going to be the issue, because if he keeps getting all these lower body, lower back, the leg issues that he has had, that's going to sap your power, and it's not going to help as you turn 35. So middle rounds type of guy in like a 12-team mixed league, where your expectations are very, very rational and managed, is the good place to go. And like you said, the now abundance of new, fresh, younger, breakthrough, growing first baseman, even corner infield in general, is becoming a little bit deeper. You figure some of those guys will come back to the mean a little bit. Maybe that's how Cabrera kind of maybe surpasses some of them in the middle tiers of first base. But yeah, it's if you're hoping for the 38 home run season or the 30 guaranteed home runs, that's not a smart rate to go. Maybe, you hope for in the 20s with the line drive stroke coming back to get him back up. I don't think 253 is going to be his new normal or anything close to his new normal. I do think he's a 280 type at his new peak physically when everything's right. So that's still, pretty really helpful if you have him as like a top 15 type of first baseman.
There's still a lot to be determined, too, with Tigers this offseason. How many pieces do they move elsewhere? What is the lineup going to look like around Miguel Cabrera heading into 2018? But yeah, an offseason to heal up certainly is a good thing, and we'll have to see where he's at next spring. But I think the initial top 50 price tag that I had expected is starting to become more of a far-fetched sort of outcome with Miggy at this point. Buster Posey has a bone bruise in his thumb. He's been kind of playing through it for a little while. The numbers for the season look like a pretty typical Buster Posey slash line, average up over 300, great OBP, solid slugging percentage, especially when you consider that half of those games come in San Francisco. 12 homers in 116 games, and that puts him on a pace for 15 to 17 if he were completely healthy here down the stretch. That's not the case, and with the Giants basically having a lost season, I would be very worried as a Posey owner that not only is he going to be compromised trying to play through the final month of the season, but the Giants may decide it's just not worth risking it, and at some point they may just shut him down.
We've talked about 4 teams so far with nothing to play for, 2 on either side of the spectrum here. It's very interesting that we talk about, the stars that are kind of things you have to worry about in the fantasy season later on as, context matters with these guys. And yeah, I agree. I think Posey probably going to be rested, a little bit more than most people think. And the fact that, the disabled list is, basically going to be disappearing with the roster expansion. They don't, some teams might not feel the roster move is necessary unless things get really dire. That's going to put a lot of people in limbo for fantasy leagues. And catcher, being a really hard position to replace, especially in NL only. Nick Hundley should have been a grab for you at this point if you're a Posey owner, just to back that up. But it's a very trying situation. Great numbers when he's active, but how much longer is he going to be active? How much more often is he going to be active down the stretch?
Speaking of the Giants, Johnny Cueto, who got smacked in his rehab start at High A Stockton, that was on Sunday. He's going to have a bullpen session Wednesday. At that point, the Giants are going to decide whether or not to put him back in the rotation. They're in a weird spot. If they push him back and he gets hurt, he's not going to opt out of his deal. If he comes back, pitches well, it may not even be enough time for him to actually pitch well enough to salvage the market if he wants to exercise the opt-out clause in his contract. Been a weird year for Cueto, too. I mean, Cueto and Miggy are two of the more veteran players that I didn't really have major drop-off concerns about. With Cueto, it's a forearm injury that he's trying to come back from right now. How he looks in that bullpen session may ultimately shape what the Giants decide to do. Was there any real warning sign of this coming with Cueto?
Maybe you figure maybe all the innings building up could have gotten to him. I was more concerned about how he was kind of in limbo at the start of the season when he was he's dealing with all his family issues, and he had visa issues if I'm not mistaken earlier in the year. And
I think it was his dad. Yeah, he was trying to help his dad with his visa problem during spring training. And he missed some time.
Right, and maybe that might have thrown off his prep. That sometimes if you're not in proper build up mode heading into the season, and you're trying to learn on the job early on in the regular season, not learn on the job, get in game shape while you're playing the actual games that count. That's probably not really helpful. So maybe the floor guys. Maybe it's just the fact that we shouldn't assume the floor guys should be like this. Be that more expensive than the upside guys, but it was a good setting. It's AT&T is a great home park. He's got the load of 200 inning seasons in the past already that made him pretty secure. I think it's just one of those fluke things, right? Depends on where he lands next year. See what happens at the end of this season. But I would buy low if he's going to have like a top 30 mixed starting pitcher for sure, and that might be the case if people are scared off.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen physically with him. Is he going to go through the offseason avoiding surgery, come into spring training next year without restrictions? A lot of questions still to be answered with Johnny Cueto, and maybe some of those will begin to be answered as we get closer to the beginning of September. But you look at the leaderboard for innings thrown, active leaders, and that includes this season too. Johnny Cueto is in the top 25, which is actually pretty ridiculous because he's piled up 1,755 big league innings in his career over 10 seasons. So he's in like David Price territory innings-wise. He's thrown more innings than Gio Gonzalez, who doesn't seem like a health risk, but people are going to try to fade him next year regardless of how good he is for the rest of this season. I'm starting to think more about the career workload as something that you do want to look at pitchers and say, I'd rather be a year early to pivot away from them than a year late. And with Cueto, that's the only thing that would have led me away. And a guy that I think fits this example, and I maybe brought him up a few weeks ago, is Zach Greinke. I mean, he's 7th right now among active pitchers. You can throw Bronson Arroyo out because he's not pitching anymore, so really 6th. And you look at the other guys ahead of him. Bartolo Colon's probably not pitching next year. So there's 2 of the guys ahead of him that are gone. Greinke's going to be top 5 among active pitchers and innings pitched heading into next season. And while he might be more of a finesse pitcher, the kind of guy that, because of his ability from a cerebral standpoint, can still find ways to get hitters out even as his stuff diminishes, aren't you better off just erring on the side of caution with guys who are nearing the top of the leaderboard among active innings pitched?
Well, I mean, we see this with Justin Verlander and Felix Hernandez have to be up there too. I would imagine Felix is definitely there, or at least he's had the concerns of workload that caused his velocity to drop and led him to I guess overachieving last year and then getting corrected and then getting hurt again. Verlander's adjusted. He's found some ways to adjust in recent years. By his fastball location, that sort of thing. His sequencing has helped in a little bit. But yeah, you have to kind of up the risk factor for these guys. And, if you're tie-breaking one of those guys with a little bit younger guy with a little bit less workload, maybe if the price is too high, maybe you do err on the side of youth at this point in fantasy baseball. I mean, I don't want to say, I'll go chase unproven players now, but, these guys at a crossroads, you notice some bad things with their velocity, bad things about the conditioning. Like Felix had some issues with conditioning, and the calf might have affected him a little bit too. So, I think innings workload has always been a concern, but I think we need to kind of realize that it's that people always throw 200 innings every year. That's not necessarily a positive.
Well, you think about it with a guy like Kershaw. We talked about him before. I mean, I think most people are still looking at him as a player that's
a little different. Yeah,
he'll be top 5 among starters everywhere, probably top 3, and maybe even first. Still, you look at Scherzer and Kershaw, both in the high 1,800 and 1,900 innings pitched range. They're probably not in that danger zone just yet. I don't know if it might just be different for every pitcher. I mean, like Verlander and Felix are more in the extreme. Verlander's at 2,500. Felix is closing in on that number, even though he's 3 years younger than Verlander. John Lackey had a good year last year, despite being even higher up on that innings pitched count. So it's going to depend on a lot of different factors. It's going to depend on defense and park factors and how pitchers have been able to get hitters out over the course of their career. But yeah, you look at this group, and Lester's had a couple of really bad starts that have led him to a disappointing season. Cole Hamels has taken a big step back. Those guys are both now in the top 10 among active pitchers. On the flip side, you see Greinke pitching well. You see Irvin Santana having a nice run so far this year. It can cut both ways, but I'm just wondering if I'm not doing a good enough job considering career workload with respect to how I'm evaluating pitchers. Like Greinke was cheap in drafts, and he was cheap in part because he had a weird spring training. Like that was
right.
I started off high on Greinke in January and pretty fearful of him by the time we got to the end of March. And despite that, finally threw the dart on him in the NFBC. Basically has saved my team in a year where the Syndergaard, Bumgarner injuries really would have ripped my team apart. Otherwise, it was just he fell far enough for it to be worth value. I think where it maybe comes in is not paying a premium for those older pitchers.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. I mean, market value is, that can erase a lot of inconsistencies and discrepancies with that sort of thing. Felix Hernandez this year was cheap, so I did take a chance on him. Because no one really wanted him. It's really just a cause of return on investment, and buying profit opportunity, I guess. And Verlander, guys like that, they weren't always that cheap. And another thing I do want to think we should incorporate more into these things is inefficiency when it comes to that sort of thing. Guys like Verlander do exert a lot of pitches per plate appearance, and that can go into this discussion a lot too. If a guy logs a lot of innings, but his pitch counts are okay and all that stuff, it's a little different. Like Kershaw, shining example of that, where he does work cleanly and all that, and it definitely counteracts a lot of that. So the pitcher's makeup, the pitcher's arsenal does factor into those types of things. It's definitely a confluence, as you said, of so many different factors, but if you look at an inefficient pitcher with that many innings, you got to think about the strain that can cause.
Yeah, I mean, all innings are not created the same because, as you mentioned, Kershaw is really efficient. A guy like Verlander, who's certainly not inefficient, had points in his career where he was less efficient than Kershaw, of course, and even on the whole, when he's good, I don't think anyone's really as efficient as Clayton Kershaw, so that could be a factor too. Maybe pitches thrown matter more than innings thrown. I would assume they probably do. And then everybody's different, as I said. So I don't know if there's anything to be learned from it, but I might be a little less aggressive with the Cueto Verlander types in the future when it's going to take a pick in the first 3 or 4 rounds to land them.
Yeah, I mean, they probably won't be there this year, but yeah, we had to look at the cycle of ADP, how it comes out to be in February, March to see which pitchers are actually getting all that love. So, maybe this is the year you go back and try them if it's really not going to cost you anything.
Moving on to some other injury information. Justin Bour took swings before Monday's game. Questionable to return this season, kind of just working his way back. Maybe gets back into the fold. I had to cut Bour in a 12-teamer, which was unfortunate because he's been hitting a ton this year. Career high OBP, career high average, career high slug. Has a shot at a career high in home runs if he gets back. In 21 in 87 games. Previous career high was 23. Still nothing guaranteed, but are you still holding out hope that we'll get a couple of weeks from Justin Bour?
I stashing him if I can. That the power there is nice if you need it. And the big thing that we've talked about this year is improving against lefties has really kind of rounded out his game. Not just a platoon player anymore. There's a lot of even though people still have that misconception of him, the fact that he's showing he can adjust like that at age 29, very very good for his future value. He might be one of those guys where you do take in the realm of Miguel Cabrera and not realize that there's actually a pretty reasonable case to do that next year if Cabrera kind of shows all those weakness signs that he showed this year. But anyway, the Marlins, that's not really a case where another case where they're not really looking to rush a guy back like that. So, Bour, guy maybe should kind of pocket for next year, if nothing else, as always a nice middle rounds breakthrough type of guy again. This year, 15 teamers, you can still hold out hope that he can with this roster space to do it.
Staying in the NL East, Matt Harvey trying to come back this week. He'll be back Friday if all goes as planned with a bullpen session on Tuesday. That is the last hurdle before they bring him back. Rehab start Saturday. Didn't go all that well at Double-A, but the Mets are still trending towards bringing him back. I got some questions on Harvey recently, kind of asking, hey, should I pick him up for the head-to-head fantasy playoffs in like a 12-team mixed league? Maybe if you like him, you can pick him up, but I certainly wouldn't activate him for his first start back. I think there's a lot of downside risk, and we've seen that. He's been more bad than good each of the last 2 seasons, which now covers 30 starts.
12-team, that's, it's a little too much excitement to show in a 12-teamer over him at this point. Add him and stash him and watch, like you said, see how he does perform in his first game back. Maybe you'll be inclined to maybe throw him out there if you really need to just throw whatever you have at like a matchup if you need to advance in September or something like that, and you don't care about the ratios at that point. But like you said, you got to wonder where the Mets are looking at him at this point. Are they going to? I mean, I would think they want to get as much read on him as possible to see what they can do with him next year. You and I have mentioned, the possibility they does eventually go to a bullpen role at some point. It's very, very up in the air, and this year it's very hard to confidently say, "Oh, I want Matt Harvey to help my team this year." In any confident way. So a wild card for sure. But if you have a room to pick up a wild card, maybe give it a try.
Said it before and I'll say it again. It was more fun when Matt Harvey was the Dark Knight and when Harvey Day was something that we all looked forward to watching. Hopefully we get back to that at some point. I'm just not optimistic it's going to be down the stretch here in 2017. Some news from the Phillies. Aaron Altair likely coming back when rosters expand September 1st along with Odubel Herrera. Altair has been a great per-game player. It's just injury after injury befalls this guy. And this year, he really stepped up to another level. Through 87 games played this year, 16 homers, a 285 average, 357 OBP, and 536 slug. Most importantly, his numbers against righties have been really good too. I mean, he's been struggling against righties at times. Last year was the best example of that, but this year, putting up great numbers against same-handed pitchers. I like what the Phillies are doing. I think a lot of people do as far as the quality of that rebuild. Rhys Hoskins is on a tear to start his career. You add Altair back to the mix with Hoskins and Odubel Herrera, and this is one of the stronger outfield trios in the National League East right now.
Yeah, they might not be as nice a streaming option for down the stretch as most people have been accustomed to for this year. That might push Tommy Joseph out a little bit more playing time because you figure they got to keep Hoskins in there however they can. Maybe they play Altair here and there to manage him a little bit more down the stretch. But yeah, I mean, the Phillies look like an intriguing team again. Even Freddie Galvis has been okay this year. Cesar Hernandez has some good growth potential. If Maikel Franco actually, lives up to his former ceiling, that's, it's going to be an interesting team to watch next year, at least on offense.
Yeah, and Scott Kingery having a good year in the minors too could be added to the middle infield mix. I would expect the way it's going to work out is against the lefties, we'll see Joseph play first, Hoskins will jump out in the outfield, and against righties, Joseph's going to sit, Nick Williams is going to play in the outfield, and Hoskins will play first base because Tommy Joseph hasn't shown enough in the second half to really merit giving him regular run at first base anymore. It's cooled off down the stretch too, so sure, the power's been okay, 19 homers, but 239, 292, 431 from a right-handed hitting first baseman, that's just not going to cut it.
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, Hoskins has basically overtaken him in the organizational depth chart without, needing to say it, but, Hoskins is basically what people were hoping Joseph would be, and he has obviously the more potential for the future.
Looking at Cargo, he was scratched with an ankle injury on Monday, still showing few signs of life at the plate. 273, 324, 394 line over the last 30 games for the season. An 802 OPS at Coors, 6 home runs so far. 534 OPS on the road, 2 home runs away from Colorado. How did he fall this much, this fast? I mean, it's kind of remarkable that he's been piling up this much playing time with so little success and half of his games coming in the best park to hit in baseball.
Well, I'll start off by saying I think there was a stretch recently over the last 30 games where he was hitting 300 or something like that. But then, the recent slump kind of took it down in that last 30 games to 273. But still, either way, Gonzalez is another one of those old young players. A lot of at bats. Since he early start to his career. I believe he's 21 or something like that when he started. It's been his 9th season, 8th full season, I guess, so to speak. Guy who's always had contact problems, relied on Coors Field. Not really much of a good contact rate to help him out. And his long swing got a lot longer this year. Just not catching up with breaking pitches as well. His hard contact rate has tanked. Maybe there's some age mix in there. Maybe it's just, the worst parts of his game coming out. Maybe you want to speculate that there's some contract concerns for next year. Maybe he is actually kind of, a little anxious about, his future. Sometimes it affects players more than we think. It's another big gathering of things that have just come to kind of really just eroded a guy's skills that were already kind of, I guess on thin ice if he wasn't performing well in his overly favorable home park. So it could be interesting to see what next year brings with all this, to see where he actually lands. I don't think he's coming back to Colorado because they have the outfield prospects to kind of move on from him at this point. And, they have Ian Desmond for a while. They could fill in there as well. And unless they could bring him back really cheap, which is possible, I don't know if they want that commitment again. So, a player I'm going to be diving in a lot on in this offseason as we look forward to next year. But it's a lot to say that, this is very much like a Hanley Ramirez type of collapse with all the, we talked about the pitchers before with all the innings pitched. Maybe this is having a similar effect on Cargo after all this time.
Yeah, you wonder too, Cargo, it kind of looks like a Ryan Zimmerman sort of arc, a guy that had several good years. Injuries were always kind of a factor and then just sort of fell off a cliff from a power production standpoint before putting it back together the way he has this year. So I don't think it's hopeless, but the knock on Cargo for years has just been, what kind of player is he going to be not playing half his games in Colorado? And I always wonder, too, people look at it and say, well, if he leaves, he's going to be the player he is on the road. And that's not necessarily true because you get accustomed to a home park. You might have another home park that's hitter-friendly, albeit none is as hitter-friendly as Colorado. But if he lands in, Yankee Stadium, which won't happen, but just as an example, that's still another great place to hit. And I think there's also something to be said for traveling to and from Colorado, and that has some effects on some players too, and that the way you hit at home in Colorado can make you disproportionately worse on the road than you would be if you were playing in a more neutral environment for your home games and then going on the road from there. Like those gaps wouldn't be as wide because your home baseline is lower, but your road baseline ends up being a little bit higher.
Yeah, that's true. Extreme effects like that could help. Maybe there is something that people are affected by the air there too, and they leave it, and it's different, biological function there as well. You could even speculate that as well, to some degree, at least, the way the high air might affect things. But definitely another incomplete guy that we've talked about. We've talked about so many of these incomplete players that you can't really look toward next year with much certainty. But these are going to be like some of the bigger case studies that are going to be heading into 2018.
That's what a buy low looks like. Looks just like Carlos Gonzalez right now, and it's been bad since the second half of last season as far as that production goes. Some other news to pass along. Danny Duffy charged with DUI in Kansas on Sunday. I know the Royals just released a statement a little while ago. Currently Duffy on the DL with a low-grade pronator strain, but the Royals are hopeful he'll be able to join the rotation in a few days. No word yet if that DUI charge is going to alter that timetable at all. Because the Royals and MLB have not indicated whether or not there's going to be further discipline. So keep an eye out for additional news on Danny Duffy in the near future. Jung-Ho Gung listed on a Winter League squad, so maybe the Pirates are holding out hope that they'll have him back in the fold for 2018. Gung, of course, was found guilty of a third DUI in South Korea back in March, was denied a work visa to return to the U.S., and has not played anywhere this season. It's not like he's been playing in the KBO or anything like that. He's just been not playing. So they're going to try to get him some at-bats in winter ball, and then from there, they're going to try to figure out if he's reinstated for 2018. So even that is hardly a guarantee because he may still be denied a work visa as we look ahead to next year.
Yeah, it's, unfortunate situation from, not the fact that he can't play, just the fact that, we're even talking about a guy with that many, things on his record and have to monitor that for next year. But yeah, it's just a development to watch heading into next season, to see how it affects the Pirates more than anything. And it's the fact that he's getting the reps, maybe there'll be some more highlight film on him to study for next year, but that's really the biggest utility of this.
And the other issue for Jung-Ho Gung, of course, there was the alleged sexual assault case that happened in July of last year in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So that was the other, aside from the 3 DUIs, that was the other incident Gung was involved in that certainly have led many to wonder, what's going on with this guy. Like, there are clearly a lot of issues with Jung-Ho Gung, but winter ball appears to be on the table for him at this point. Let's talk about some players that have been on the move. The Angels have been shifting pieces in that bullpen a lot this season. Blaine Parker is the guy that is coming up into a more prominent role. You look at Blake Parker as a guy that never really had success outside of a 2013 run with the Cubs. 2014 with the Cubs fell apart from an ERA and WHIP standpoint. Bounced around with the Mariners and Yankees last year. Never really gained any traction. Comes out this year, gets 73 strikeouts in 57 2/3 through his first 62 appearances. Gets the save on Monday night after Cam Bedrosian scuffled in his last outing against the Astros. We already know that Bedrosian's not going on back-to-backs right now. Parker's 32 years old, Tim. Is there anything here as far as a mixed league pickup in leagues where you can hold on to players, like a keeper league where you could add him for a buck or two and hope that he's getting saves a year from now?
Oh, I think he might have more. It might be one of those like really deep mixed league type of guys. Even if he doesn't get saves, he'll very much help you. And these relief sample sizes can reveal crazy things from year to year. They might not always stay, but he hasn't really changed much about his arsenal. He's maybe stopped throwing the curveball. He's throwing the sinker a bit more. That's probably helping him a little bit. Swinging strike rate's going up. One of those things that could just go back to normal next year and not really have anything going. Because I think 2.18 ERA, that's a bit of a too good of a jump. But you never know. The Angels, they might view something out of him as that guy to be clear for the next saves. And it's not a case where I would really go hard on AL only because that could really bite back if you. Because there's a little less replacement value to make a mistake there. But if only we could own like team bullpens in fantasy, the Angels would be actually a surprisingly decent one to own because they have some good pieces in the back there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because when you look at the Angels, like they're doing it with some no-name sorts of guys too. I mean, the resurgence of Bud Norris earlier this year, I know it didn't last all season. That was a pretty big surprise too. Kenyon Middleton coming out of relative nowhere to be a good piece for them. Part of it's the defense. The Angels have a great defense, so that also helps raise the baseline for all their pitchers as a whole, and that would include a guy like Parker Bridwell, who I think you and I have talked about at least once over the course of this season. Mm-hmm. Bridwell, former prospect in the Orioles system, I don't think anybody had any sort of expectation that he would come in and hold his own over half a season, but that's what he's done so far. Despite having a very low strikeout rate, he keeps the ball. He doesn't keep the ball in the yard. That's a problem. He avoids beating himself up with walks, and that allows him to get over allowing a lot of home runs. And even more recently, he's cut that home run rate down. His last 6 starts, he's got a 22-6 strikeout to walk, 3 homers allowed during that span. That's against some teams that hit a lot of long balls. I mean, the Astros are in there. We got the Orioles in there twice. The Jays on the road. I mean, there's some teams that can do damage, and Parker Bridwell has seemingly been just a nice value for the Angels, but a surprisingly effective pickup for fantasy owners.
Yeah, he doesn't allow that many ground balls. So that the 265 BAP, could be a sign that that's just the way he kind of works. I guess sometimes the lower the few ground balls you have, the lower your BAP usually is. Left on base rate's a little high, about 84%. That's above average. That's a ripe stat to come down, but. There are pieces here that kind of work, as you said. Having Andrelton Simmons at shortstop will make any pitcher more confident I guess inducing more contacts as opposed to striking many guys out. But he attacks the strike zone well. That works in his favor. So the Tanner Roarkian types of pitchers like that, they can have some utility for stretches. Just don't bank on that for the entire season.
Roarkian, nice. That's your term, I think, at this point. But a guy that certainly looks like he's pitched his way into a rotation spot for 2018 now. As well as he's getting a lot of streaming usage in 10 and even 12 team mixers, and that would not have been the case from the jump with Parker Bridwell. Mark Leiter Jr. has a 2-start week this week. He's already been added in leagues that had a pickup deadline over the weekend, of course. The first of those starts against Atlanta comes at home. He, of course, is being streamed in spots much like Bridwell as a result of that matchup. Do you look at Mark Leiter Jr. and kind of have similar feelings with him as you do with Bridwell, or do you see a little more there from a talent base?
Maybe a little bit more in the strikeout department if he gets things right. It's not necessarily the biggest right now. He's got almost 8 per 9, but that's still pretty good for a guy like that. You worry about the control not being as good as Bridwell is here, so that's probably going to kind of keep him back glowing on earth. But maybe if he gets the ground ball approach working well, that could help him as well. I'm not the most excited about him though because not much of a sample size and a little bit less defensive help from the Phillies there. Stream him. Don't think of anything more than that. Yeah,
get yourself some shares of Luke Weaver instead. If Weaver is available, he's got a start coming up against the Brewers, and we've seen Weaver flash a lot of strikeout potential. Really interesting player for the Cardinals here down the stretch, and as we look ahead to 2018. Some other pickups, Byron Buxton being added in the more shallow mixed leagues, and understandably so. He's continued to make adjustments, and it's really paid off. The problem with Byron Buxton, coming off a 3-homer game on Sunday against the Jays, anytime he goes through a stretch where he's playing well, the price, I think, is going to be disproportionately high because we're all going to look at it and say, all right, this is it. This is the payoff we've all been waiting for. Let's go ahead and pay top dollar to get it. And he's not doing this quietly. That 3-home run game, I think, kind of alerted everybody to just how good he's been over the last 6 weeks or so now. You go back over his last 30 games, 8 homers thanks to the 3-homer game. But if you threw that out, it'd be 5. That's still pretty good for the last 30.
Pretty good.
8 for 8 in stolen bases. OPS now up over 1,000 during that span. And most importantly, the Ks are being kind of held into a normal sort of level. One concern I know that Todd has expressed is that we're still not seeing Buxton walk a ton. 5 walks during that span, but generally speaking, things look pretty good. Where are you at on Buxton right now? Are you thinking this is the true breakout and rolling into 2018, we could see elite sorts of production from this guy?
Well, I look at the fact that that he has changed his swing. I'm a big proponent of guys that who's runs like this being backed up by a mechanical change. Not that they'll last forever, but it can help them reach a new level of performance that we haven't seen yet. So maybe you judge him on the new mechanics more than anything else that actually helps him. He was a post-hype guy, so that's always a good buying opportunity there. But now the hype's coming back as a regular player instead of a prospect, and strikeouts are becoming a little more acceptable in today's game. So that's one thing that could give him a little bit more life. With those stolen base potential of 40 in a full season, that's always going to ring true to anybody when it comes to that. So pay for 20 homer power for a full year every year. I'm not certain I would do it, but if he's available at the 75th pick next year in a mixed league, I would be down for that. I could see it being much more expensive than that, which I wouldn't want to buy too strongly in that, especially AL only, because again, replacement value is going to be less there than the mixed league. So, yeah, top 100 player for sure. I think next year I would be very comfortable picking him there. Anything 50 or above, I'm going to be I'm a little less confident in that.
And I wonder if people in the NFBC, especially where players are very aggressive hunting for upside, if they will in fact throw a 3-4 pick at him, right at that turn. And if that happens, I think I may have to be out on Buxton for 2018 as well, which is sad because I've been patient with him in general, thanks to the speed especially. I mean, the stolen base floor is still very high, and that's something he's been providing in a big way this year. 24 of 25 as a base stealer with a 311 OBP. I mean, imagine if he got on base more. He could run even more. It'd be pretty amazing. On the flip side, looking at some players that have been dropped, Yoenis Cespedes, expected to miss the rest of the season, as he's just been battling leg trouble all season. It's a hamstring injury. It's going to knock him out for good, and they were saying a minimum of 6 weeks. The Mets, of course, are going to be done in 6 weeks, so Cespedes is now done. 81 games played, Tim, and 892 OPS. I mean, he's been great on a per-game basis, kind of matching the 30 to 35 home run power we've seen over the last 2 seasons, but had a really difficult time staying on the field and was a pretty frustrating player to own as a result. He was pretty affordable in drafts for the per-game upside that he brought to the table, just going outside the top 50 in drafts this year. If he falls, if he's in that range where Buxton's going, in the 75 to 100 range, I'm really interested. I know Cespedes is one of those players. He's had soft tissue injuries in the last 2 seasons now, but he was pretty healthy in 2014 and 2015, and I believe in the skills.
Yeah, I mean, the reason he fell, I think, was because the lack of stolen bases. No one's going to think he's going to steal the 16 he stole in his rookie year again, and it doesn't make sense for him to. It's not a style of play anymore, and as you said, he's getting older with the leg injuries. It's probably going to be a surprise if he does steal around 10. But yeah, I mean, that's some really secure power and run production. That you can get around that time. Sure that might be becoming a little bit more easier to find later in drafts. You could find someone very similar to him, probably. Maybe like 85% of his production later in a mixed draft, but I still like the security he does bring when he is on the field, and the threshold that he'll have to meet is much less at that point, so it's not going to matter as much if he misses time for you. So, yeah, I mean, skills are still great. Want to see how this kind of burns into next spring training, but yeah, if Cespedes around pick 100, I would be all aboard on that.
It's almost like there's some Nelson Cruz in Cespedes. I mean, a much younger version of the player at this point. Cespedes will turn 32 in October. It was more of like a groin problem that slowed him down last year, hamstring though on multiple occasions here in 2017. I like that the K rate has stayed low and that he was able to keep the walk rate up a bit like it was last year. Last year he spiked up to 9.4%. This year just checking in at 8.1. That's much better than the close to 5% walk rate we saw in 2014 and 2015 from Yoenis Cespedes. His teammate, Michael Conforto, getting another opinion on his shoulder. That's one of those situations, too. I'm not expecting Conforto to come back. It's a dislocated shoulder, torn posterior capsule, which would require surgery. The Mets are hoping for good news. The Mets never get good news, so I would be very surprised if we saw Michael Conforto come back this year. And even if he did, he just may struggle with the health of his shoulder in those final weeks of the season.
Yeah, no reason for them to bring him back. They toyed with him enough earlier in his career, bringing him up and down and all that stuff. And at 25 years old, you want to preserve that guy for next year as much as possible. No reason to risk it, but you never know. The Mets might do that. So it's I wouldn't count on it. Stash him in a deep league. Maybe if someone cut him and you could pick him up for like $0 for the year or something like that to see if he does go. But yeah, don't center your plans around Conforto coming back at all.
The Cards are hoping that Jed Jerko is going to make it back before the end of the season. He's on the 10-day DL with a hamstring injury. He's been cut in a lot of places. Is it worth waiting on Jerko if you've got enough bench spots to do it, or do you think he's kind of in that territory where you let him go and just find a player that's going to play, like a Matt Olson or a Matt Chapman, or just some kind of volume corner to step in? I mean, some people are using Jerko in the middle infield, of course, too. Which
right.
His versatility is what helped make him really valuable this season. That's going to change. He hasn't qualified in most leagues at any other position for next year except for third. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that all the extra value Jerko had, having played 46 games at second base and 26 at short last year, that's going to go away, and he may be third base only in most leagues as we look ahead to 2018.
Yeah, we talked about the crowded corner infield crowd before. That pushes him down even further in utility. For the shallower, 15 and above mixed leagues, he's going to be a little bit less valuable there. But yeah, if you need help this year at some of those spots, you want to have that security. Stash him. I don't mind it. It's covering a couple positions like that down the stretch. If he does come back, that could be a nice bonus piece, depth piece to have there. But another one where it's like, the Cardinals do have some options to keep him out if you want to rest him. You never know, but they are sort of competing for the postseason still, so I could see it being a case where they would get him back if he can.
Eric Thames, a player that's just below the top 15 or so drops. People are tiring of Thames. I mean, more recently, he's been quiet again. Last 30 games, just 4 home runs, a 703 OPS during that span, 29 Ks in 89 at-bats. 27 homers in the season, but a low average at 238. So if you're in a league that uses average instead of OBP, he's been a negative there. Only 52 ribbies, which is pretty surprising as well.
He's let off a lot, too, so that goes with that.
He's let off, and the Brewers have had some issues getting contributions from the leadoff spot at times, too. Jonathan Villar's season hasn't exactly helped Eric Thames from a run production standpoint. But, I mean, the Brewers got a deal on Thames because of the uncertainty, and I think based on what they paid, they're probably at least breaking even, if not coming out ahead. I got to look at the FanGraphs ratings to be sure, but nevertheless, where are you at on Thames as you start looking ahead to next year? Is it power so easy to come by that you expect Thames to be even cheaper in drafts than he was at the draft table in 2017?
I could see him in the Miguel Cabrera tier next year among first basemen. But I believe Thames has the first base outfield eligibility, so that might make him a little more valuable in the deeper leagues that could value that sort of the multi-position eligibility there. But there's enough uncertainty here that you don't want to buy him ahead of. I don't think he's even in Justin Smoke territory for next year, because Smoke is, I believe in Smoke's skills a lot more than I do in Thames' skills across the board when it comes to, play discipline and all that stuff. So, and Thames, still needs to figure out how to hit left-handers, which I think is possible, but I'm not going to bank on it, for everyday play in a fantasy league next year. So, another top 15 first base type that kind of blends together near the end of the bottom of that tier. Maybe I don't know how deep Eric Hosmer goes down, but, do you decide between like an Eric Hosmer and an Eric Thames next year for the power upside what Thames has? But, Hosmer's a more stable player. Yeah, I think that's kind of a right place to situate him.
I mean, it's crazy. If you look at first base eligible players, there are a lot that have earned more in a 15-team mixed league than Thames so far. Thames is at $13, according to the RotoWire earned auction values to this point. Ahead of him, this is a long list, Goldie at the top, 45. Votto at 37, Smoke at 31. Smoke's going to be really interesting at the draft table next year. Rizzo, Zimmerman, Hosmer, Daniel Murphy qualifies as a first baseman, even though we usually use him at second. Cody Bellinger, Abreu, Travis Shaw. Mark Reynolds at $25 has had a great year. Freddie Freeman, if he wouldn't have missed time, would be way ahead of him, but he's still ahead of him at 20. Edwin Encarnacion, Marwin Gonzalez, Logan Morrison, Josh Bell, Carlos Santana, Yonder Alonso, and Will Myers has matched Thames at $13 so far. And Myers gets you some steals. He's got 16 again this year. Both are low average guys with big power. Both are on teams that don't score a ton of runs, but score runs. I mean, they're not like horrible based on where they're hitting in the lineup. So Myers and Thames will be kind of interesting too. They might get lumped together. If Bohr hadn't missed so much time, he would have finished ahead. Interesting that Matt Carpenter is down there too. I just think with so many first basemen, so many quality first basemen producing, he's going to get buried in ADP. I mean, he was cheap in some leagues, and others there was someone in the room that thought he's a top 100 player. I thought he was a top 100 player, but he's been pretty quiet after a really big first month.
Yeah, just the whole adjustment to the league again, the league adjusting back to him. And like you said, it's the fact that he is being bad. I do like for next year that no one's really going to care about him, I think. So that works in his favor. We've seen him display skills that he now owns. As the adage goes, once a player displays a skill, he'll own it, and he can show it again. So, the fact that he's outfield eligible, he could be a fourth or fifth outfielder even more effectively, if that's the case, if he qualifies, instead of a first baseman. So there's ways to get Thames on your team without having to compare him to other first basemen. So I kind of like that aspect of it. If you need the late round power or something like that, that could really help from there. But yeah, it's funny how this team has kind of worn off with him, and that's when I like to buy guys. So
yeah, he'll be a cheap corner infield filler in mixers for next year, and with that park and the possibility of improvements in that lineup, I kind of like the idea of taking the chance at a reduced price on Eric Thames. All right, Tim, nothing in the mailbag today before we sign off. Anything of note as far as beers go this past weekend?
A lot of repeat showings, actually. I had a couple of Leinenkugel Summer Shandies last Saturday for a friend's birthday. That was, outdoor patio seating, good lunch type of deal. Really the perfect spot for a beer like that. And then I had unfiltered Ballast Point Sculpin the other day with some mussels. That was nice. Yeah, it's very another good summery type of deal there. And I repeated. I think for the second or third straight weekend in a row, I had the Founders Nitro Oatmeal Stout. So always fantastic to have that one. What about you?
Real good. I had Three Floyd's Alpha King over at the UW Terrace, which is probably the best place to have a beer in Madison when the weather's nice. It's not good in February to go over there, but this time of year, it's pretty much perfect over there. And as far as your American pale ales go, that's one of the best ones around. I really like the Alpha King quite a bit. It's probably a top 5 APA for me at this point. All right, well, that's going to wrap things up for this episode of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. If you got questions you want us to get to in a future episode, hit us up on Twitter. He's at Tim_Heaney. I'm at Derek VanRiper. You can also tweet at RotoWire. Just let us know it's a mailbag question. Otherwise, email us, fantasybaseballpodcast@gmail.com. We can get to questions from there as well. Thank you for listening. Todd and I are back with you on Wednesday.